Agnes Hayes was staring at the computer screens as numbers danced before her eyes, forming a pattern that sent a chill down her spine. It was 3 a.m, and she was alone in her apartment, surrounded by stacks of financial documents that her new client had sent for preliminary analysis. Each transaction she traced led to another company, and that to another, forming a web so intricate it seemed intentional. And then she saw it. A transfer of $8 million that appeared in 3 different places in the records, with slightly altered dates, passing through 5 companies in less than 48 hours before disappearing completely from the books. Money laundering. It wasn't a suspicion. It wasn't a possibility. It was money laundering on an industrial scale, executed with a sophistication she had never seen before. Agnes pulled back from the computer, as if the screen might burn her, her heart racing. Samuel Stone wasn't just a successful businessman. He was something completely different. And she, in her meticulous search for truth in numbers, had just discovered secrets that probably cost lives. Her phone vibrated on the desk, the sound echoing too loud in the apartment's silence. A message from an unknown number lit up the screen with words that transformed her fear into absolute panic. "I know you found out. Be at my office tomorrow at 7 p.m. Come alone, Agnes. We have much to discuss about your future." Hello, I'm Rachel Ashwood, and this is another narration from our channel. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so this content reaches more people. Leave your like, share with those friends who love intense stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Remember that this is a narration, fictional content created for entertainment. 24 hours before that terrifying message, Agnes Hayes was sitting in her office in downtown Las Vegas, reviewing the week's schedule with her assistant. It was an ordinary Monday in October, with the desert sun streaming through the windows and illuminating the walls decorated with diplomas and certifications that attested to her competence. Agnes had built her reputation brick by brick, client by client, transforming her financial consulting firm into one of the most respected in the city. At 28 years old, she was sought after by businessmen who needed someone capable of deciphering accounting complexities, finding errors that cost fortunes, and organizing corporate finances with surgical precision. She loved her work. She loved the feeling of solving numerical puzzles, of finding patterns where others saw only chaos. Numbers made sense to Agnes in a way that people often didn't. They were predictable, logical, honest. Or at least she had always believed that. When her assistant mentioned that a new client had requested her services, offering a generous advance for a complete audit of his companies, Agnes accepted without hesitation. The name Samuel Stone meant nothing to her beyond another Las Vegas businessman needing her services. She didn't research him, didn't ask questions beyond the professional ones. That would be her first mistake. A mistake that would change absolutely everything. Agnes spent that Monday immersed in other projects, finalizing reports for old clients and responding to emails that accumulated in her inbox. It was only at the end of the afternoon, when Samuel Stone's digital files arrived via encrypted email, that she began the preliminary analysis. The message accompanying the documents was brief and direct. "Ms. Hayes, attached are the financial records of the last 3 years of my companies. I need a complete audit and recommendations for tax optimization. An in-person meeting will be scheduled soon. Sincerely, Samuel Stone." Professional, courteous, nothing that raised red flags. Agnes downloaded the files, prepared a cup of coffee, and began the work she did best, diving into the numbers and finding the story they told. The first hours were normal. Samuel Stone owned 4 nightclubs scattered throughout the city, 3 upscale restaurants, 2 import and export companies, and stakes in various real estate ventures. The profits were impressive, the expenses seemed reasonable, and everything was documented with a level of detail that even impressed her. But Agnes wasn't just competent, she was exceptional. And exceptional people notice things that others ignore. It was when she began cross-referencing between Samuel's different companies that the first strange patterns emerged. Transactions between Samuel's companies that happened in values too round to be coincidence, transfers that repeated at almost mathematical intervals, suppliers that appeared in the records of multiple companies but had no verifiable digital presence. Agnes frowned, noting the inconsistencies in a separate notebook. It could be accounting carelessness. It could be poor organization. But her instinct said it was something different. She decided to take the work home, where she could concentrate without office interruptions. At 8 in the evening, Agnes was in her apartment, still wearing the gray pants and blazer set she had worn all day, her heels abandoned beside the sofa as she sat on the living room floor with the laptop on her lap and documents spread around her. She ordered Chinese food, put on a jazz instrumental playlist to play softly, and dove headfirst into the financial puzzle that Samuel Stone had placed before her. Hours passed. The food grew cold on the kitchen counter, forgotten. Agnes was completely absorbed, following the trail of money through an increasingly complex web of transactions. And then, at 3 in the morning, when the city outside was finally beginning to quiet after the nocturnal frenzy, she found it. The transaction that changed everything was for $8 million. It first appeared in the records of one of the import companies, dated March 15th. The money supposedly came from a sale of merchandise to an overseas distributor. But when Agnes checked the records of the buying company, she found the same transaction recorded as an investment in expansion, not as a purchase of merchandise. Interesting. She continued following the trail. The money left the second company 3 days later, transferred to one of Samuel's real estate companies as payment for development consulting. But in the real estate books, that amount appeared divided into 12 monthly payments from different clients. Agnes felt her pulse quicken. She opened more files, cross-referenced more, and the pattern revealed itself with crystalline clarity. The same money circulated between Samuel's companies, changing categories, being divided and regrouped, appearing and disappearing from official records through an accounting choreography so elaborate it bordered on art. But it was illegal. Completely, unequivocally illegal. Samuel Stone was laundering money through his legitimate businesses, using the complexity of multiple interconnected companies to obscure the origin and destination of millions of dollars. And he had hired Agnes to audit all of this. Why? The question echoed in her mind as she looked at the computer screen, the numbers now seeming like silent accusations. Did Samuel not know she would discover it? Had he underestimated her, thinking she would do a superficial audit and stamp everything as approved? Or was it something worse? Did he want her to discover it? Agnes got up from the floor, her legs numb after hours in the same position. She walked to the apartment window, watching the lights of Las Vegas blinking in the distance. Her rational mind said she should do what any ethical professional would do: document everything, refuse the client, and report the irregularities to the competent authorities. But a smaller, more frightened voice whispered that people who move millions in illegal operations don't usually react well to reports. She returned to the laptop, her hands trembling slightly as she saved all the work to an encrypted drive. It was almost 4 in the morning. She should sleep, wait for daylight to make important decisions. But Agnes knew she wouldn't be able to close her eyes. She had discovered something dangerous, and now she needed to decide what to do with this knowledge. That's when the phone vibrated on the desk, the sound making her jump in fright. Agnes picked up the device, her heart racing, and saw the message notification from a number that wasn't saved in her contacts. Her fingers hesitated over the screen for a second before opening the message. I know you found out. Be at my office tomorrow at 7 in the evening. Come alone, Agnes. We have much to discuss about your future. She read the words 3 times, each reading making the fear tighten harder in her chest. He knew. Samuel Stone knew she had discovered it, and somehow he was monitoring her work. How? The files were encrypted. She was in her own apartment, using her own network. Unless the files he had sent had some kind of embedded tracking, some software that reported every document she opened, every spreadsheet she analyzed. Agnes dropped the phone on the sofa as if it burned. She looked around the apartment, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable. The curtains were open. Anyone could be watching from another building. She ran to the window and closed the curtains with a sharp pull, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. Breathe, Agnes. Think clearly. She forced herself to sit on the sofa, her hands pressed against her temples. Options. She needed to consider her options rationally. Option 1. Ignore the message, take everything she discovered, and go straight to the authorities in the morning. But what if Samuel had contacts in the police? Men who move this kind of money usually do. She could be delivering herself directly to his allies. Option 2. Attend the meeting as he demanded and listen to what he had to say. But that meant voluntarily entering the wolf's den, putting herself at the mercy of a man who clearly had no scruples about violating the law. Option 3. Disappear. Take the essentials, leave the city before dawn, and never look back. But Agnes had built her entire life in Las Vegas, her company, her reputation, her few friends. Running away would mean abandoning everything. And besides, men like Samuel Stone probably had resources to find people who tried to disappear. Agnes spent the rest of the early morning awake, alternating between panic and attempts to rationalize the situation. When the sun finally began to rise, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink, she still didn't have a clear answer. But one thing was certain. In less than 15 hours, she would be face to face with Samuel Stone, and her life would never be the same. She took a long shower, trying to wash away the fear that seemed stuck to her skin. She dressed carefully, choosing a black suit that made her look more confident than she felt. Makeup to hide the dark circles, hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Professional armor to face what was coming. Agnes didn't go to the office that day. She called her assistant saying she was working from home on an urgent project and shouldn't be disturbed. A lie, but necessary. She spent the day reviewing everything she had discovered, organizing the evidence, making copies on multiple backup drives that she hid in different places in the apartment. If something happened to her, at least there would be a trail. At 6 p.m, Agnes grabbed her purse, checked 3 times that she had her phone fully charged, and left the apartment. The walk to the car seemed longer than normal. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every person on the street a potential danger. Was she being paranoid? Probably. But considering the circumstances, a little paranoia seemed justifiable. Samuel Stone's office was in a skyscraper in downtown Las Vegas, far from the glitter and chaos of the Strip. It was an elegant building, all in mirrored glass that reflected the orange evening sky. Agnes parked in the basement, watching the security cameras that seemed to follow her every move. She took a deep breath, grabbed her purse tightly, and walked to the elevator. The lobby was luxurious, with marble floors and crystal chandeliers that projected light patterns on the walls. The receptionist, an impeccably groomed woman with platinum blonde hair, smiled when Agnes approached. "Good evening. You must be Ms. Hayes. Mr. Stone is waiting. Top floor, main office. The elevator on the right will take you straight there." The voice was professional, but there was something in the woman's eyes. Pity? Curiosity? Agnes couldn't decipher before turning and walking to the indicated elevator. The doors closed with a soft whisper, and Agnes watched the numbers increase on the digital display. 10th floor, 15th, 20th. Each passing number made her heart beat faster. She checked her phone once more. Still had signal. Could still call emergency if needed. But what would she say? That she was voluntarily going to meet a criminal who had summoned her. 25th floor. The doors opened directly to a private corridor, with walls covered in dark wood and indirect lighting that created an atmosphere that was both elegant and intimidating. There was only one door at the end of the corridor, 2 massive pieces of carved wood that seemed more appropriate for a castle than a modern office. Agnes walked slowly, each step echoing in the silence. When she was a few meters from the door, it opened, revealing a tall man wearing a perfectly cut gray suit. He didn't smile, just nodded and stepped aside, holding the door open in a silent invitation. Agnes entered. The office was enormous, occupying what seemed to be the entire floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Las Vegas, the city stretching in all directions like a carpet of lights beginning to turn on with the arrival of night. But Agnes barely noticed the view. Her attention was completely focused on the man sitting behind the mahogany desk in the center of the office. Samuel Stone was younger than she expected, probably in his late 30s, with dark hair combed back and eyes that seemed to assess every detail of her in a fraction of a second. He wore a black suit without a tie, the first button of his white shirt open in a gesture of calculated casualness. There was a feline quality to his posture, a stillness that suggested contained power. He didn't stand when Agnes entered. He just watched as the security guard closed the door behind her, the sound of the lock being activated echoing like a sentence. "Ms. Hayes," Samuel said, his voice surprisingly soft. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." He gestured to one of the leather chairs in front of the desk. Agnes remained standing. "I prefer to stand, thank you. Let's get straight to the point, Mr. Stone. Why did you call me here?" A smile touched his lips, quick as lightning. "Straight to the point. I appreciate that. You discovered some irregularities in my financial records." It wasn't a question. "Irregularities is a polite way to describe money laundering on an industrial scale," Agnes responded, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. "You're moving millions through shell companies, falsifying records and violating more federal laws than I could count." Samuel leaned back in his chair, his fingers interlaced over his abdomen, and watched her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "You're as good as they say. Better, perhaps. Most of the consultants I hire don't find even half of what you discovered in one night." "So you wanted me to discover it," Agnes said slowly, understanding arriving like cold water. "This was a test." "Very perceptive." "Yes, Ms. Hayes, it was a test. And you passed with distinction." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Which brings me to the reason you're here. I have a proposal for you." Agnes felt a chill run down her spine. "I'm not interested in working for a criminal." "Criminal is such a limited word," Samuel said, a touch of amusement in his voice. "I prefer unconventional entrepreneur. But I'm not offering employment, Agnes. May I call you Agnes?" She didn't respond, and he continued as if she had agreed. "I'm offering a game. You like puzzles, don't you? Finding patterns, solving numerical mysteries. I can see it in the way you organized your discoveries. Meticulous, brilliant. So let's play a game that will test exactly those skills." Agnes crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive posture that she knew he would notice. "What kind of game?" Samuel slid a black folder across the desk toward her. "You have 30 days. During this period, you'll have complete and unrestricted access to all my operations. Every company, every transaction, every record that exists. Your task is to find all the illegal operations, not just the obvious ones you've already discovered, but everything. Every laundered penny, every falsified document, every broken law." He paused, his eyes fixed on her. "If you can find everything in 30 days, I'll turn myself into the authorities. Personally. You'll have enough evidence to put me behind bars for the rest of my life, and I won't fight it." Agnes blinked, certain she had misunderstood. "You're saying you'll turn yourself in if I prove you're a criminal? Why on earth would you do that?" "Because I'm bored, Agnes. Because I built an empire that no one can challenge, and it's become tedious. Because I want to see if there's anyone in the world intelligent enough to actually beat me at my own game." There was something disturbing about the raw honesty in his voice. "And if I can't find everything in 30 days?" Agnes asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "Then you work for me. Permanently. You'll use your exceptional intelligence to expand my operations, to make them even more sophisticated, impossible to trace. You'll become part of my world, Agnes, and there will be no going back. The silence that followed was dense, loaded with implications that Agnes was still trying to process. And if I simply refuse? If I walk out of here now and go straight to the police with what I've already discovered? Samuel smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. You're too intelligent to do that. You know I have resources, connections. The evidence you collected would disappear before reaching any court. And you would become a problem that would need to be solved. I would prefer to avoid that. You interest me much more alive and working than as a memory. It was a veiled threat, but a threat nonetheless. Agnes felt anger begin to boil beneath the fear. So I really have no choice. Either I play your game, or you eliminate me. We all have choices, Agnes. I'm just making the consequences of each one clear. Samuel stood, walking around the desk to be closer to her. He was tall, Agnes realized, needing to tilt her head slightly to maintain eye contact. But think about it. If you win, you put a criminal behind bars and become a hero. If you lose, you earn more money than you ever dreamed of, and access to intellectual challenges that will make your current work seem like child's play. Either way, you come out gaining something. Accept my freedom, accept my integrity, Agnes retorted. Overrated concepts, Samuel said lightly. But I understand your point. So, what will it be, Agnes Hayes? Do you accept to play? Agnes looked at the black folder on the desk, then back at Samuel. Every rational instinct screamed for her to refuse, to find a way out of this situation. But there was something more, a smaller voice that whispered about the nature of the challenge he was offering. 30 days to dismantle a criminal empire. It was impossible. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of puzzle that her mind couldn't resist. If I accept, she said slowly, I want guarantees. I want everything documented. I want a contract that specifies the exact terms of this game. Samuel smiled, and for the first time the smile seemed genuine. I see you're already thinking strategically. Excellent. You'll have your contract, every term clearly defined. My lawyers will prepare everything by tomorrow. But I need your answer now, Agnes. Do you play? She took a deep breath, knowing that whatever she said next would change the course of her life completely. I play, Agnes said, and the words came out firmer than she felt. But know this, Mr. Stone. I'm going to find everything. Every illegal operation, every dirty penny. And when the 30 days are over, you'll be behind bars. Samuel extended his hand. I'm counting on it. Do we have a deal? Agnes looked at the extended hand for a long moment before shaking it. His grip was firm, warm, and lasted a second longer than professionally necessary. We have a deal, she confirmed, and when their hands separated, Agnes had the distinct feeling that she had just made a pact with the devil, but it was too late to go back now. The game had begun. Samuel returned behind the desk and took a black card from the inner pocket of his jacket. This card will give you access to all my establishments and offices. The codes for the digital systems will be sent to your secure email by midnight. You'll start tomorrow. He paused, tilting his head slightly. One last thing, Agnes. During these 30 days, you'll be under my protection. There are people in my world who won't be happy with someone investigating so deeply. You'll have discreet security, whether you want it or not. I don't need babysitters, Agnes said, taking the card. It's non-negotiable. Consider it part of the deal. There was a firmness in his voice that left no room for argument. Agnes put the card in her purse, each movement deliberate as she processed everything that had happened in the last 15 minutes. She had entered that office expecting threats, maybe violence. Instead, she had received a challenge that was simultaneously terrifying and exciting. Can I go now? She asked. Of course. Marcus will escort you to the elevator. The security guard who had opened the door reappeared as if he had been summoned telepathically. Agnes turned to leave, but Samuel's voice stopped her. "Agnes?" She looked over her shoulder. "I'm looking forward to seeing what you're capable of." There was something in the way he said it, an intensity that made something strange happen in her stomach. Agnes didn't respond, just followed Marcus out of the office. The way back to the elevator seemed shorter. The doors closed, and Agnes finally allowed her shoulders to relax. The tension she had maintained throughout the meeting finally released. She looked at her reflection in the polished metal of the elevator doors. She still looked like the same person who had entered the building half an hour before. But everything had changed. When Agnes reached the parking garage, she immediately noticed the black SUV parked 3 spaces to the left of her car. The windows were too dark to see who was inside, but she knew. "Discreet security," Samuel had said. Apparently his definition of discreet was different from hers. Agnes got into her car, started the engine and drove out of the parking garage. The SUV followed her, maintaining a distance of 2 cars. She should feel safer knowing she had protection. Instead, she felt watched, controlled. When she arrived at the apartment, Agnes locked the door more carefully than normal, checked all the windows and closed the curtains. She grabbed the laptop and opened her email, finding the promised message from an encrypted address. Access codes, passwords, detailed instructions for accessing systems that were probably protected by multiple layers of security. Samuel was really giving full access. Agnes spent the next few hours planning her strategy. She created spreadsheets, organized a timeline, established priorities. If she only had 30 days, every hour needed to count. She would start with the import companies, since that's where she had found the first evidence. Then she would move on to the nightclubs, then the restaurants, and finally the real estate properties. Methodically, systematically, she would dismantle Samuel Stone's empire piece by piece. It was almost midnight when Agnes finally allowed herself to lie down, though she knew sleep would be difficult. Her mind was racing, processing information, formulating theories, anticipating challenges. She had accepted to play a dangerous game with an even more dangerous man. But Agnes Hayes had never backed down from a challenge, and she wouldn't start now. What she didn't know, as she finally fell asleep with the laptop still open beside the bed, was that Samuel Stone was in his own office, watching a computer screen that showed the location of the tracker discreetly embedded in the card he had given her. He smiled at the screen, a smile that no one was there to see. "Let's see what you're made of, Agnes Hayes," he murmured to the empty office. "Let's see if you're really as exceptional as you seem." The game had begun, and neither of them had any idea how it would really end. Agnes woke at 6 a.m. to her phone alarm, feeling as if she had slept only minutes. She dragged herself out of bed, prepared coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and took a shower that alternated between hot and cold water to force her brain to function. Today was the first official day of the game. She needed to be sharp. At 8 o'clock, Agnes was parking in front of the first target of her investigation, an import company called Meridian Trade Solutions, located in a commercial complex on the outskirts of Las Vegas. The building was discreet, without any flashy sign, exactly the kind of place that would go unnoticed. Perfect for operations that preferred not to draw attention. Agnes used the black card Samuel had given her on the reader beside the main door. The light changed from red to green with a soft beep, and the door unlocked. Inside, the office was surprisingly normal. Cubicles, computers, files. There was even a small break room with a coffee machine and a microwave. 3 employees were working at their desks, and they all looked up when Agnes entered. A middle-aged woman with reading glasses hanging on a chain approached. "You must be Ms. Hayes. Mr. Stone informed us you would be coming. I'm Margaret, operations manager. How can I help you?" The woman seemed genuinely helpful, with no sign of nervousness or hostility. Either she was an exceptional actress, or she really didn't know about the illegal nature of the operations she managed. "I need access to import records from the last 5 years," Agnes said, maintaining a professional tone. Invoices, cargo manifests, customs documents, everything. Of course. We have everything digitized. I'll set you up in our private office in the back. Quieter for working. Margaret guided her down a corridor to a small but comfortable room, with a desk, ergonomic chair, and a state-of-the-art computer. The password is on this paper. If you need anything, just call me. She smiled and left, closing the door softly. Agnes sat down, turned on the computer, and began to work. Hours passed in a blur of documents, spreadsheets, and numbers. Agnes barely noticed when Margaret brought a sandwich and water at lunch. She was completely absorbed, following the trail of transactions that were beginning to reveal a pattern. Merchandise that was imported with declared values far below market value. Products that arrived in the United States but never appeared in sales records. Payments to suppliers that didn't exist when she tried to verify commercial records. Each discovery was meticulously noted on her personal laptop, each piece of evidence documented and categorized. At 6 p.m, Agnes had a throbbing headache and a list of 15 serious irregularities in just that one company. And this was just the beginning. She saved all the work to multiple backups, thanked Margaret, and left the building. The black SUV was parked across the street, waiting. Agnes ignored it, got in her car, and drove home. But instead of going straight to the apartment, she made a detour, stopping at an electronics store. 20 minutes later, she left with 3 new encrypted external drives and a tracker detection device. Paranoia, maybe. But considering who she was dealing with, caution seemed more appropriate. Back at the apartment, Agnes swept the black card Samuel had given her with the detector. As she suspected, there was a tiny tracker embedded in the magnetic strip. She smiled, a humorless smile. Of course there was. Samuel Stone wasn't the kind of man who left anything to chance. Agnes left the card on the living room coffee table, in plain sight, and took her laptop to continue working in the bedroom. If Samuel wanted to track her, let him track. She had nothing to hide. Yet. The next few days fell into an intense routine. Agnes woke early, visited a different company each day, dove into records for hours, and returned home with more evidence of illegal operations. Each of Samuel's businesses had its own way of laundering money, each adapted to the type of operation. The nightclubs inflated expenses with phantom suppliers. The restaurants declared much less revenue than they actually generated. The real estate companies bought properties with money of obscure origin and sold them clean. It was an elaborate, multifaceted system, and the more Agnes discovered, the more impressed she was with the sophistication of the operation. Samuel Stone wasn't just a criminal. He was a criminal genius, and that bothered her more than it should. On the 10th day, Agnes was reviewing records at one of Samuel's nightclubs, a place called Eclipse, that was on the Strip, and attracted a high-level clientele. It was late at night, the club was closed to the public, and she was alone in the administrative office when the door opened. Samuel Stone entered, wearing dark jeans and a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. It was the first time Agnes had seen him since that initial meeting, and she found herself noticing details she had missed before. The way he moved with feline grace, the intensity in his eyes when they landed on her. Working late, he observed, closing the door behind him. Time is passing. 10 days have already gone by. Are you on schedule? Agnes saved the file she was working on before responding. I'm exactly where I need to be. I've found illegal operations in each of your companies so far. Money laundering, tax fraud, document falsification. You've built an impressive empire of crimes. Thank you. I take pride in my work, Samuel said, and there was a touch of humor in his voice. He approached, leaning on the edge of the desk, close enough for Agnes to smell his cologne, something woody and expensive. But finding what's obvious isn't the real challenge, Agnes. The challenge is finding what's hidden, the operations that not even my managers know about. Agnes tilted her head, studying him. You're saying there are deeper layers, operations within operations. I'm saying you haven't seen even half of what I've built yet. And the clock keeps ticking. There was a challenge in his words, a provocation that made something competitive awaken in Agnes. Then maybe you should stop distracting me and let me work, she retorted. Samuel smiled, that dangerous smile she was beginning to recognize. Maybe I like distracting you. You get interesting when you're irritated. Before Agnes could respond, he moved away from the desk and walked to the door. Keep looking, Agnes. The most valuable things are always hidden in the most unlikely places. And then he left, leaving Agnes alone with her confused thoughts and a heart beating faster than it should. She forced herself to return to work, but his words echoed in her mind. Operations that not even the managers knew about. Deeper layers. Agnes opened a new file and began to search differently. Not just for the obvious irregularities, but for the empty spaces. The transactions that didn't make sense not because they were illegal, but because they didn't seem to have any purpose at all. Payments too small to matter. Transfers that happened at strange times. Companies that existed only on paper but had minimal activity in the records. And then she found it. A company called Phantom Solutions, registered in Delaware, that appeared in Samuel's records only 3 times in 5 years. Each transaction was for exactly $50,000. There was no description of the service provided, no contact beyond a generic email address. Agnes tried to trace the company through public records and found almost nothing. Phantom Solutions existed legally, but had no digital presence, no listed employees, no activity beyond these transactions with Samuel. It was a shell company in the most literal sense, and if there was one, there were probably more. Agnes spent the next few hours looking for similar patterns, and found 6 additional companies that followed the same model, all registered in different states, all with minimal activity, all receiving regular payments but small enough not to raise red flags in normal audits. This was what Samuel had mentioned, the deeper layers. Agnes felt a wave of satisfaction. She was getting closer. When she finally left Eclipse at 3 a.m, she was exhausted but energized. The black SUV was still there, following her home like a faithful shadow. Agnes was beginning to get used to the constant presence. Almost. The following days were a race against time. Agnes worked 16, sometimes 18 hours a day, surviving on coffee and pure determination. She discovered more shell companies, traced transactions through tax havens, found offshore bank accounts that connected all of Samuel's operations in a global network. It was bigger than she had imagined. Much bigger. Samuel wasn't just laundering money in Las Vegas. He had operations in 6 countries, moving amounts that made the millions she had initially found seem like pocket change. On the 20th day, Agnes was in her apartment, surrounded by stacks of printed documents and 3 laptops open simultaneously, when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Hello? Ms. Hayes. The voice was male, rough, definitely not Samuel. You need to stop investigating. This is a friendly warning. Agnes's heart raced. Who are you? Someone who doesn't want to see you get hurt. Stop looking. Forget what you discovered. Disappear. The call ended. Agnes stared at the phone, her hands trembling slightly. She should be scared. And she was. But she was also furious. Someone was trying to intimidate her, and that meant she was getting close to something important. Something that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. Agnes picked up the phone again, and for the first time since the game began, called the number Samuel had provided for emergencies. He answered on the second ring. Agnes, did something happen? I received a call, a threat telling me to stop investigating. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and when Samuel spoke again, his voice had a cold quality that Agnes hadn't heard before. Are you at home? Yes. Stay there. I'm coming. The call ended before Agnes could protest. She looked around the apartment, suddenly very aware of how vulnerable she was. All the evidence she had collected was there, organized in orderly piles. If someone wanted to destroy her work, it would be easy. 15 minutes later, someone knocked on the door. Agnes checked through the peephole and saw Samuel, accompanied by 2 men she recognized as part of his security. She opened the door. Samuel entered, his eyes immediately sweeping the apartment, assessing. "Tell me exactly what was said." Agnes repeated the conversation word for word. Samuel listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each second. "Did you recognize the voice?" "No, but he knew who I was, what I'm doing." Samuel turned to one of the security guards. "Trace the call. I want to know where it came from and who made it." The man nodded and left, already typing on a phone. Samuel returned his attention to Agnes. "You can't stay here tonight. It's not safe." "I'm not running from my own apartment," Agnes protested. "I'm not asking. You're going to stay in a safe place until we find out who made that threat and neutralize them." There was an authority in his voice that didn't accept argument. Agnes crossed her arms. "You can't just order me. I can and I will. You're under my protection, remember? That means when your safety is at risk, you do what I say." They stared at each other, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Agnes sighed. "I need to take my work. All the documents, the laptops. I was already counting on that. Marcus will help you pack everything." The other security guard entered the apartment and began carefully collecting the documents, organizing them in boxes he had apparently brought specifically for this purpose. 20 minutes later, Agnes was sitting in the back seat of the black SUV that had been following her for weeks, with Samuel beside her and her boxes of evidence carefully stored in the trunk. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My house. It's the safest place I know." Agnes looked at him, surprised. "Your house? You're taking me to your house?" "I have a security system that would make the Pentagon jealous. No one gets close without me knowing. You'll be safe there." There was something more in his voice, a concern that seemed genuine. Samuel's house was in the hills outside Las Vegas, an isolated property surrounded by high walls and gates that opened only after multiple security checks. The house itself was modern, all glass and steel, with a spectacular view of the illuminated city below. Inside, it was surprisingly welcoming. Dark wood floors, comfortable furniture, art on the walls that looked genuine and expensive. Samuel guided her to a guest room on the 2nd floor. "You can stay here. Private bathroom, everything you need. I'll have your boxes brought to the office next door, where you can continue working." Agnes entered the room, noting the king-size bed with sheets that looked absurdly soft, the floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the mountains. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, turning to face him. "Protecting you is part of the deal." "No, I mean, why really? You could have simply let whoever made that call scare me enough to give up. You would win the game by default." Samuel approached, stopping close enough for Agnes to need to tilt her head to maintain eye contact. Because that wouldn't be victory. It would be cheating. And I don't cheat, Agnes. When I win, it will be because you gave your best, and it still wasn't enough. Not because someone intimidated you into giving up. There was an intensity in his eyes that made something strange happen in Agnes's chest. "You're a criminal who has principles about cheating. That's absurdly hypocritical." "I never said I wasn't a hypocrite," Samuel responded, a touch of humor returning to his voice. "Rest. You look exhausted. We'll continue tomorrow." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Agnes stood alone in the luxurious room, trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. She should be terrified. She should be planning a way to escape. Instead, she found herself thinking about how Samuel's eyes had looked genuinely concerned when he appeared at her apartment. How his voice had become cold and dangerous when he learned of the threat. How he had insisted on protecting her, even if it meant bringing her into his own private space. Agnes lay on the bed, still fully dressed, and looked at the ceiling. 10 days left. 10 days to find everything that was still hidden and win the game. 10 days living in Samuel Stone's house, working alongside him, seeing sides of him that probably no one else saw. This was dangerous. Not just physically, but in ways Agnes was beginning to realize she hadn't anticipated. She was beginning to see Samuel not just as the criminal she needed to defeat, but as a person. Complex, contradictory, and disturbingly fascinating. And that, Agnes knew, could be the greatest danger of all. Want to know more intense and engaging stories like this? Don't miss the ebook collection Dangerous Obsession, with adult stories that will hold your attention from beginning to end. You'll find the link pinned in the comments and the QR code on the screen. These are narratives that explore forbidden passions, power games, and relationships that challenge all limits. Agnes woke to the smell of fresh coffee. For a moment, disoriented, she didn't recognize where she was. Then the memory of the previous night returned, and she sat up in bed, realizing she had fallen asleep still dressed. There was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," Agnes called, running her hands through her hair in a futile attempt to fix it. Samuel opened the door, carrying a tray with coffee, fruit, and toast. He wore gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt, a casual version of him that Agnes had never seen. He looked younger like this, more accessible. "I thought you might need coffee before facing the day," he said, placing the tray on the table beside the bed. "Thank you." Agnes took the cup of coffee, grateful for the caffeine. "Did you find out anything about the call?" "Burner phone, impossible to trace. But I'm investigating. I have some suspicions about who might be trying to sabotage our game." He sat in the armchair near the window, watching her with an expression Agnes couldn't decipher. "Our game?" Agnes repeated. "I thought it was your game. It stopped being just mine the moment you agreed to play. Now it belongs to both of us." There was something in the way he said it that made Agnes's heart accelerate. She took a sip of coffee to give herself time to regain composure. "I need to get back to work. I only have 10 days left. Your temporary office is ready. All your boxes have been organized exactly as they were in your apartment. I thought you would appreciate the order." He stood. "I'll be home today if you need anything." After Samuel left, Agnes took a quick shower, grateful to find completely new feminine hygiene products in the bathroom, and dressed in yesterday's clothes. She would need to get more clothes from her apartment eventually, but that could wait. The office Samuel had prepared for her was perfect. A spacious room with a large desk, multiple monitors, and all her document boxes organized exactly as he had promised. Agnes settled in and dove into work, determined not to think about how disturbing it was that Samuel paid enough attention to replicate her exact organization. Hours passed. Agnes was so absorbed in tracing a particularly complex series of transactions that she didn't notice Samuel enter until he placed a plate with a sandwich beside the keyboard. "You need to eat," he said simply. "Thank you," Agnes murmured, her eyes still fixed on the screen. "I found something. Look at this." She turned one of the monitors so Samuel could see. "These transactions here, they all pass through this company, Nexus International. But when I try to trace Nexus, it leads nowhere. It only exists on paper." Samuel leaned in, studying the screen. He was close enough for Agnes to feel the warmth of his body. "You're good. Nexus is one of my oldest operations. I thought it was buried deep enough for no one to find." "Nothing is buried deep enough if you know where to look," Agnes said, turning to look at him. Their faces were inches apart. For a moment, neither moved. Agnes could see the small lighter spots in his eyes, the strong line of his jaw, the way his lips curved slightly in an almost smile. "You're extraordinary," Samuel said softly, and he didn't seem to be talking about her investigative skills. The moment stretched, charged with a tension Agnes wasn't prepared to name. Then Samuel pulled away, breaking the spell. "Keep looking. There's still more to find." He left the office, leaving Agnes with her heart beating irregularly, and a confusion of feelings she didn't want to examine too closely. She forced herself to return to work, but it was harder to concentrate now. The next few days fell into a strange pattern. Agnes worked intensely during the day, discovering layer after layer of Samuel's operations. In the evenings, they dined together, conversations that began about the game, but inevitably drifted to other subjects. Agnes discovered that Samuel was well-read, with strong opinions about literature and art. He discovered that she had a dry sense of humor that made him laugh in ways that clearly surprised him. There were moments of tension, looks that lasted a second longer than they should, accidental proximity that seemed anything but accidental. Agnes knew she was in dangerous territory. She was beginning to like Samuel Stone, not just respect him intellectually, but genuinely like him as a person. And that was a problem. On the 25th day, Agnes was reviewing everything she had found, organizing the evidence into a coherent presentation that could be delivered to the authorities. She had documentation of money laundering on a massive scale, tax fraud, operations with tax havens, shell companies, everything. It was enough to put Samuel behind bars for decades. She should be triumphant. Instead, she felt a weight in her chest that she couldn't ignore. There was a knock on the office door. Samuel entered without waiting for an answer. Something Agnes had learned was a habit of his. 5 days left, he observed, leaning on the desk. How's the progress? I found everything, Agnes said, turning to face him. Every illegal operation, every laundered penny, every broken law. I have enough evidence to ensure you never see daylight as a free man again. Samuel smiled, but there was something sad in that smile. Then you won. Congratulations, Agnes. You're as brilliant as I thought you would be. Why do you seem disappointed? Agnes asked. You should be happy. The game is over. Because, Samuel said slowly, I was kind of hoping you wouldn't find everything, that you would lose and have to stay. The raw honesty of the statement took Agnes's breath away. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. These last 25 days, having you here, working alongside you, getting to know you, it was... He paused, searching for the right word. Unexpected. You're unexpected, Agnes. Agnes stood, needing distance, but Samuel moved at the same time, and suddenly they were very close. I won the game, Agnes said, but her voice came out less firm than intended. You have to turn yourself in. I know. A deal is a deal. Samuel raised his hand, his fingers lightly touching her face. But before I do that, I need to know. Was this real only for me? These moments between us, these conversations, the way you look at me sometimes when you think I'm not noticing. Was it all part of the game for you? Agnes should say yes. Should lie, create distance, protect herself. But she was never good at lying. No, she admitted in a low voice. It wasn't part of the game. You're impossible, Samuel Stone. You're a criminal. You break the law as if it were a suggestion. You built an empire based on illegal activities. And yet, I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop wanting to know more, to see more of those moments when you let the mask drop and show me who you really are. Agnes, Samuel said, and there was something reverent in the way he pronounced her name. And then he kissed her. It was a kiss that felt inevitable, as if all the weeks of tension and denial had led exactly to this moment. Agnes found herself responding, her hands rising to his shoulders, pulling him closer. It was wrong on so many levels. She should be thinking about how to deliver him to justice, not about how his lips moved against hers, with an intensity that made her whole world tremble. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. This complicates everything, Agnes said. I know, Samuel responded, his forehead resting against hers. But I don't regret it. Agnes closed her eyes, trying to order her chaotic thoughts. You still have to turn yourself in. That was the deal. I won. I know. And I will. But Agnes, I need you to understand something first. He pulled back slightly, holding her face between his hands. Everything I built, all these illegal operations, it wasn't out of greed. It was out of necessity. There are reasons, context you don't know. Then tell me, Agnes said. Make me understand. Samuel released her and walked to the window, looking at the city below. My younger brother, Daniel, has a rare medical condition. The treatments aren't covered by insurance, and they cost millions. When our parents died, I was 22, and Daniel was 15. I promised I would take care of him, that I would do whatever was necessary to keep him alive. He turned to look at Agnes. I started with legitimate businesses, but it wasn't enough, not fast enough. So I started cutting corners, making deals with people I shouldn't. And one thing led to another, and suddenly I was in too deep to get out. Agnes felt something tighten in her chest. Your brother. All of this was for your brother? I'm not asking for forgiveness. I knew what I was doing, knew it was wrong. But if I had to choose between the law and Daniel's life, I would choose Daniel every time. There was a raw pain in his voice that made Agnes want to go to him, comfort him. Where is he now? At a private clinic in Switzerland, receiving the best available treatment. Treatment that I pay for with dirty money. Samuel laughed without humor. Ironic, isn't it? I break the law to save the only person who always believed I was good. Agnes processed this information, her analytical mind trying to reconcile the criminal she had spent weeks investigating with the desperate brother who would do anything to save his family. That doesn't change what you did, she said finally. I know. But it changes how I see why you did it. Agnes approached him. Samuel, there are legal ways to get help. Programs, foundations. You think I didn't try all that first? He interrupted, frustration tinging his voice. I spent years knocking on doors, begging for help. No one cared. Daniel was just another number, another hopeless case. So I stopped asking permission and started taking what we needed. They stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Agnes spoke. You still have to turn yourself in, but I'll help you organize things so Daniel continues receiving treatment. There are legal ways to transfer enough funds to cover his care before your assets are frozen. Samuel looked at her with an expression Agnes couldn't decipher. Why would you do that? I lost the game. You don't owe me anything. Because, Agnes said, despite everything, despite all the laws you broke, and all the reasons I should simply hand you over without looking back, I care about you. And I care that your brother shouldn't suffer for your choices. Something changed in Samuel's expression. You're extraordinary, Agnes Hayes. Completely, absolutely extraordinary. The last 5 days were a frantic race. Agnes worked with Samuel's lawyers to structure a legal trust fund for Daniel's care, using assets that could be provably legitimate. Samuel began organizing his businesses, transferring legitimate operations to trusted managers, documenting everything for the authorities. They worked side by side, sometimes late into the night, an unlikely team united by a common goal. And in the breaks between work, there were stolen moments, kisses that shouldn't happen but happened anyway, whispered conversations about futures that probably would never exist. Agnes knew she was falling in love with him. It was inconvenient, irrational, and completely inevitable. On the 30th day, Agnes was in the office that had become hers during those weeks, looking at the final presentation of evidence on her screen. Everything was there, organized, documented, ready to be delivered. Samuel entered, wearing a dark suit. He looked prepared to face what was coming. Are you ready? Agnes asked. No, but I'll do it anyway. He approached, taking her hands. Agnes, before we do this, I need you to know. These 30 days with you were the best of my life. You made me want to be better, to be the man you see when you look at me.
Samuel, Agnes began, but he interrupted her gently. Let me finish. I'm going to turn myself in. I'm going to pay for what I did. But when I get out, and I will get out eventually, even if it takes years, I'm going to find you. If you want to be found. Tears burned in Agnes's eyes. This is crazy. You're going to be locked up for decades.
Then you'll have decades to decide if a reformed ex-criminal is worth waiting for. He smiled, but there was sadness in that smile. Or you can move on, build an amazing life, and I'll understand. But I needed you to know that for me, this isn't the end. It's just a pause. Agnes pulled him into a kiss, pouring everything she couldn't say in words. When they separated, she held his face between her hands. You're impossible. You've said that before. Because it keeps being true. They went together to the FBI office in Las Vegas. Agnes delivered all the evidence, watched as Samuel gave his statement, confirming everything. The agent seemed shocked by the extent of the operations, impressed by the meticulous documentation Agnes had compiled. When they put the handcuffs on Samuel, Agnes felt something break inside her. But he looked at her over his shoulder and smiled. It was worth it, he said. Every second was worth it. And then he was taken away. And Agnes stood alone in the sterile FBI office, holding a card Samuel had slipped into her hand at the last moment. She looked at the card. There was only an address written on it and a date. 3 years in the future. Agnes put the card in her purse and left the building. The Las Vegas sun was strong, the sky absurdly blue. She had won the game. She had put a criminal behind bars. She had done the right thing. So why did it feel like she had lost something precious? In the months that followed, Agnes tried to return to her normal life. She went back to work, accepted new clients, rebuilt her routine. But nothing seemed the same. She visited Samuel in prison once. Just once, because seeing him behind that glass, talking through a phone, was too painful. You don't need to wait, he said. I know, but maybe I want to, Agnes responded. 3 years passed. Agnes built her company, became one of the most respected financial consultants in the country. She dated other people, tried to move on, but no one made her feel what Samuel had made her feel. No one challenged her the same way, saw her the same way. On the day marked on the card, Agnes took a plane to a small coastal town where the address led her. It was a house by the sea, simple but beautiful. And on the porch, waiting as if he knew exactly when she would arrive, was Samuel. He looked different, thinner, with some new lines around his eyes. But the smile was the same. You came, he said, and there was wonder in his voice. Did you doubt? Agnes asked, climbing the porch steps. Every day. But I hoped anyway. He approached. I got out 6 months ago. Good behavior. I used the time to think, to plan. I started a consulting business, completely legal, helping companies identify financial vulnerabilities. Ironic, I know. Appropriate, Agnes corrected. You were always good at finding loopholes. Now you're using it for good. I learned from the best. Samuel took her hand. Agnes, I don't expect you to simply go back to where we left off. I know 3 years is a long time, but if you give me a chance, a real chance to prove I can be the man you deserve, I promise I won't waste it. Agnes looked at him, at the man who had turned her world upside down, who had challenged everything she believed about right and wrong, who had shown her that people were more complex than simple categories of good and bad. One chance, she said. But Samuel, if you break the law again, if you go back to that world, it's over. I won't go through this again. You have my word. That life is over. I want to build something new, with you if you'll let me. Agnes smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she had given in 3 years. Then let's build. They stood on the porch as the sun set over the ocean. Two players who had found something more valuable than victory or defeat. They had found each other. And sometimes, Agnes thought as Samuel pulled her into an embrace, sometimes the most dangerous game of all is the one we play with our own hearts. But when you find someone worth the risk, someone who challenges and completes you in equal measures, you play anyway, and hope that, this time, everyone wins. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story and want to support the creation of more content like this, consider becoming a channel member to have access to exclusive videos that aren't available to the general public. You can also send a super thanks. All donations made to the channel will be used for the creation of new stories even more engaging. Your support makes all the difference, so we can continue bringing narratives that hold your attention from beginning to end. Until the next story,